Good morning to everybody. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you and to thank you for being so numerous today and for being with us at this conference. I would like to say thanks to all the speakers and to Professor Carbone, who is near me today, to Professor Geraci, who will chair our conference, and that with their presence will bring prestige to our event. Special thanks also go to Avvocato Pietro Picciocchi, who is Municipal Councillor for Budget, Public Works and Maintenance and Green Spaces in Genoa, who, notwithstanding his uncountable commitments and his unceasing work for our city, for our town, for us Genoese, has accepted to be here with us. It is a great sign of friendship on his side, and I honestly cannot find appropriate words to express my gratitude to him. Thank you very much, Pietro, indeed. A few words to present the event of today. The conference is part of a project that the University of Genoa is carrying out under the guidance of the University of Bologna with Professor Stefano Zunarelli and the University of Insubria and Trieste, within the PRIN, so-called PRIN 2017 project on the Belt and Road Initiative. The University of Genoa is participating in the project together with the Department of Law, of Economics and Political Sciences, and the scope of the research activity of our unity is focused on the analysis of the Belt and Road Initiative from the EU law point of view. We all have heard about the Belt and Road Initiative, and today we will tackle the topic which in the very last days has become even more topical, as we all know, focusing on the question of its impact on ports infrastructure, discussing about the relationship between the European Union and China as regards the investment question in the light of the recent agreement that has been reached but has not yet been concluded, been signed by the two parties, with the help of our speakers. So I stop here. I don't want to waste any more time and leave the floor to Pietro Picciocchi, thanking him again very much for being here with us today. Thank you, Pietro.
Buongiorno a tutti, grazie Chiara, un saluto particolare al professor Carbone. Porto il saluto dell'amministrazione comunale, del nostro sindaco a questo importantissimo convegno. Ringrazio per averci invitato come Comune di Genova. È un tema di straordinario interesse perché riguarda una opportunità enorme per lo sviluppo economico della nostra città che dobbiamo cogliere. Voi sapete che nel 2019, quando ci fu l'accordo, l'intesa tra la Repubblica Popolare Cinese e la Repubblica Italiana, il nostro porto, insieme al porto di Trieste, insieme al porto di Venezia, fu indicato come hub per la via marittima della seta. Noi di fatto avevamo già iniziato a lavorare per cogliere questa opportunità straordinaria di sviluppo dei traffici commerciali dall'Oriente al nostro paese, dove vogliamo che Genova diventi l'hub più importante. Abbiamo iniziato a lavorare in particolar modo dopo la caduta del Ponte Morandi, allorché con il decreto legge 109 del 2018 è iniziata una stagione importantissima di investimenti per il nostro porto. In particolare ricordo l'articolo 9 bis, che conosciamo molto bene come Comune di Genova, come autorità di sistema portuale, che ha dato l'avvio al programma straordinario di investimenti urgenti per la ripresa e lo sviluppo del porto di Genova. Naturalmente l'esigenza era quella di superare rapidamente l'emergenza connessa al crollo del ponte Morandi, ma con una visione rivolta verso il futuro. Sapete che questa disposizione ha previsto la competenza del commissario straordinario per la ricostruzione del ponte Morandi, che è il sindaco di Genova Marco Bucci, che ha approvato e segue attraverso la struttura commissariale della quale anch'io ho l'onore di partecipare ai lavori, il programma straordinario in questione. Poi che cosa è successo? È successo che oltre questi primi stanziamenti pari a 480 milioni, a seguito dell'approvazione del programma avvenuto con vari decreti commissariali, si è affacciata l'opportunità del recovery plan. E questa è un'opportunità straordinaria per consentirci di sviluppare questo piano di investimenti, la cui opera più importante è certamente la nuova diga foranea, che è un'opera di oltre 1 miliardo. Sapete che è stato aperto e già concluso un dibattito pubblico in città e l'idea è quella di avviare i lavori nel prossimo mese di luglio, quindi il prossimo anno sarà caratterizzato, luglio 2022 evidentemente, il prossimo anno sarà caratterizzato dalla progettazione di questa grande opera. Ebbene, oggi il recovery ci dà la possibilità di realizzare questi interventi in una condizione di autonomia. Siccome nella famosa intesa nel 2019 si era prefigurata una partecipazione di gruppi cinesi leader nel campo delle costruzioni alla realizzazione di quest'opera, chiaramente oggi questi gruppi potranno partecipare alla gara che sarà bandita per l'esecuzione di questo appalto, ma in una condizione chiaramente di totale parità con qualunque altro gruppo. Allora, che cosa voglio dire? Che ovviamente non è compito mio entrare in complessi scenari geopolitici, sappiamo quali sono i timori, no, legati alla Via della Seta, legati alla penetrazione della Cina in Europa, legati alla cessione delle nostre infrastrutture alla Cina, come in parte sta avvenendo in effetti in alcuni paesi asiatici. Certamente queste risorse che stiamo gestendo in questo momento, su un piano che vale circa 2 miliardi di euro e su cui riusciamo ad essere autonomi, ci dà, io credo, una maggiore indipendenza, una maggiore forza contrattuale, ci permette di candidare il nostro porto come hub principale per la via marittima della Seta, ma non esclusivamente per la via marittima della Seta. Recentemente avrete letto le parole del console, no, degli Stati Uniti, che è entrato su questo tema evidenziando come questi investimenti che stiamo facendo di fatto rendano il nostro porto fruibile e disponibile anche per altri traffici. Dico ancora una cosa e concludo, perché ieri sono reduce da un incontro con l'architetto Renzo Piano, che ci sta seguendo su importanti progetti della città, il waterfront di Levante, e lo abbiamo proprio interessato anche rispetto al tema dello sviluppo del porto. Sappiamo benissimo che una delle linee fondamentali del recovery è proprio quella della sostenibilità, e noi abbiamo un progetto molto importante, molto ambizioso, che stiamo accelerando fortemente, e che è quello dell'autonomia energetica del porto, la decarbonizzazione del porto. Questo è un punto di focale importanza, perché potrà contraddistinguere nel mondo il porto di Genova, e abbiamo chiesto, data la delicatezza di questi interventi anche dal punto di vista estetico della città, all'architetto Renzo Piano di supportarci. Questo è molto importante anche per la percezione che la città ha del porto, perché purtroppo per troppi anni il porto è stato inteso non come una grande opportunità di sviluppo, ma come una servitù. Quindi concludo, vi ringrazio ancora Il periodo indubbiamente è molto interessante, si apre una stagione di grande opportunità e dovremo essere bravi a saperle cogliere velocemente con gli strumenti che ci dà la legge. Ricordo e concludo veramente che il decreto Genova prevede delle semplificazioni nelle procedure di aggiudicazioni degli appalti attraverso l'applicazione dell'articolo 32 della direttiva appalti, che è quella che abbiamo seguito per la ricostruzione del Ponte Morandi. Quindi ci sono veramente tutte le condizioni per fare un ottimo lavoro e per, come dicevo prima, trasformare in grande opportunità per lo sviluppo della nostra città questi movimenti internazionali di cui oggi voi discuterete. Restiamo aperti ai contributi di tutti. Io mi sono organizzato in maniera tale da poter ascoltare le vostre relazioni. Auspico che ci possa essere una collaborazione sempre più intensa tra il mondo accademico e le vostre ricerche e il ruolo e l'attivismo delle amministrazioni comunali e dell'autorità di sistema portuale. Grazie ancora e buon lavoro.
Thank you, Pietro. Grazie, Pietro, infinitamente. And I think that now we can move to our agenda and leave directly the floor to Professor Gerati for the beginning of our conference. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I will just give you my understanding on where things stand now, what we did 2 years ago with the signing of the Belt and Road MOU, and what I think are the risks and the opportunities, and then I leave the floor to the speakers. Just now we heard a reference to the fears of this Belt and Road. Like in any investment situation, there are of course risks and there are opportunities. My personal view, what I have seen is that our country, Italy, has focused a lot on the risks and very little on the opportunities. So we had a unbalanced public debate on the fears and very little about what this could bring. When we do that, I teach finance, it's like we set the threshold of investment a little bit too high, and then we end up into a trap of not doing anything because we think the project is too risky. If we were to think like this, no one would invest anything anywhere and everyone would just be at home. It is fair to analyze the risk, but when we skew it too much on the side of the risk, we miss out on the opportunities. And this is why I think we need to have debates like this to tell companies, policymakers, authorities about that there is also the other side of the equation. The fears are there. There is the fear of a debt trap. There is the fear of losing strategic assets. There is the fear of maybe Chinese geopolitical interference with our domestic policies. There is the fear of not having our Italian economy not participating into the development of the Belt and Road, non-equal access, no transparency on the process. These are all correct fears, but they do not apply to Italy. The debt trap applies to Sri Lanka. They apply to maybe Malaysia, some African country. It does not apply to a 1.7 billion economy like Italy. Debt trap happens when the debt to GDP starts to be a little bit too high, not if anyone, Chinese or French or American, invest a few billions into our economy. So debt trap is a problem, but it's not ours. It's a small country's problem. Losing a strategic asset, it is a problem, but not ours. I'll let the floor to the people who are more expert. We cannot sell ports, so we can only leave concessions. So we have no fears of losing assets or underselling assets at a discount because we just cannot sell them. This is a problem maybe for Greece that did sell the Piraeus port, but then again, like in every situation, you do sell something you get something back. You don't give it away for free. And I give you an anecdote. I was talking to Alexis Tsipras, the former Prime Minister of Greece, at the time while we were discussing this Belt and Road. And he really told me, you know, Michele, why are you guys in Italy worried about? Yes, we sold our strategic assets, and now Athens has become the biggest port with the 5-6 million TEUs. We gave jobs to people who were otherwise unemployed. It is not ours anymore, but we gain in terms of employment and in terms of GDP in the local economy. So we always need to strike the balance. We also talk about the strong presence of Chinese into European ports, but we will hear more in the later presentation. My understanding, my fear is that the Chinese is indeed present a lot in Europe, but very little in Italy. So everyone else does business with China, and we only have a very, very small presence. Of course, Vado is one of those, but you know, China is really dominant in many other ports. The fourth and second last point is we need to really separate geopolitics from economy. Otherwise, we get into a loop from which our country, our company will never get out. If we start discussing who do we stand with, do we stand on this side, do we stand on the other side, we run the risk, and this is my real worry, that in order to show that we are friends with country A, we become enemies with country B. And the country B, the Belt and Road is not Italy and China. The Belt and Road is the map that we all have seen. It's the whole of Asia. It's the whole of Africa. It's largely half of Europe. Of course, it's Chinese dominant project, but if we become enemies of country B, China, we pick up a fight with the whole Asian continent, with the whole African continent, 6 billion people. And so we need to be aware of it. It's perfectly okay. Don't get me wrong, to be part of the European Union. It's okay to be part of the NATO. It's okay to be part of the Atlantic Alliance. But these things need to be fully understood and put into the context of what they are, without making unnecessary enemies. And my fear, and I make this appeal to the media, to the general public debate in our country, in Italy, is that in order to be friends with someone, and we are and need and want to be friends with the United States, you know, I work for the New York University and I work for all the investment banks in the States. We don't need to say we are friends with you and we are enemy with someone else. We just need to stop the sentence in half, because otherwise we create unnecessary worries. And the recent, I'm talking yesterday's press release, do make me worry that in exchange for running, you know, too much to show something to American friends that know very well where we are, we run the risk of making our companies and our people pay the price of a bad habit that we have of talking too much. Finally, I'm very happy to be here today because I think today's event will help the audience separate the myth from the reality. And I've only highlighted a few things that I think we need to address, but other speakers will discuss it in more detail. So there's a lot of confusion. It's becoming a debate where whoever speaks louder, it says something that is more true. That's not the case. We are professors here. We are presidents of commercial entities, municipalities, and we need to bring back our public debate in our country back to fact, back to analysis. No slogans, no preconceived ideas, ideologies that would really give us a bad outcome. So I'm very happy. I stop here, and I'm really very happy to give the floor to President Ducci, who will indeed start telling us about the difference between fact and myth. I like the title of his presentation, I like the titles of the other presentation, but this is storytelling versus facts. What is the situation? What is the reality of things? And this is a great beginning to set the basis so that everyone knows what is really happening, and then we can move on to discuss and analyze it. I stop here. Please, President Ducci, the floor is yours. Look forward to hearing your speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Geraci. I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Please confirm that you can see it now. Okay, I think that you are seeing it. Well, my intro, 12 minutes. Well, I start also the countdown. Well, storytelling versus fact checking, China and Maritime Europe. Well, first of all, I have to give you an initial alert. Well, as been introduced as the vice chairman of the Conftrasporto Confcommercio, that is the biggest Italian transport trade organization. But up to last year, I was the chairman of Federagenti, that is the Italian Shipbroker and Ship Agents Association, in which Costco is a member. So Costco is the big Chinese state-owned shipping company. Also, all the other biggest shipping company are members of Federagenti, but I have to give you this initial alert that I am part, Costco is part of my organization. In 60 seconds, I would like to show you 3 slides, 3 decades of globalization, because in order to understand what Belt and Road Initiative is and was born, I think that we have to give a wider view to what's happening in the world. Well, we have to start to 1989, and the year in which everyone considers that globalization started. Globalization started earlier, but 1989 is the year in which we are considering the first day with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the 3 main drivers of globalization has been free trade agreement, World Trade Organization as main icon of the free trade agreements that we had during the last 3 decades, low cost of transport with containerization representing a way to have low-cost transport, a safe, efficient way of moving goods around the world, allowing goods to be moved around the world. Then free flow of data of information with the World Wide Web Internet representing the big tool that we had to share information. But if we give a look to the period between 1989 and 2019, the year before the arrival of COVID that probably changed the world in some way, we see that if we make the comparison between 1990 and 2018, we have a clear picture of what I was telling. World trade on GDP rose from 39% to 58%, and the international assets and liabilities on GDP almost quadruplicate in 30 years. But if you give a look to the share of the 3 decades, we see that something was already changing in the last 10 years. We see that world trade on GDP was 61% in 2008, and now was 58 in 2018. So we can see that we had, starting from the financial crisis of 2008, already a change in what we had known as globalization. Just to give you a look to a few data on that. On the first picture, you can see the number of custom tariffs introduced by the major worldwide countries in a period 2008 and 2016, that is before Donald Trump. And you can see that United States introduced more than 1,000 tariffs against free commerce during that period. Then we had Donald Trump with America Great Again, Make America Great Again. That means that the polarization, the regionalization of economy. Then let's give a look to the cost of transport. Cost of transport decreased as a unit cost of transport up to 2008, then remained stable between 2009 and 2020, when we, out of the blue, realized that an incredible increase of the cost of transport. Nowadays, we cannot consider anymore the transport as something cheap. And at the same time, under certain circumstances, we cannot consider it also efficient. Well, the famous cover of Economist showing globalization, understanding, trying to explain what was happening in the economy in the last year, arrived before the COVID spread. And if you give a look also to the main and the main target of our speeches today, the foreign direct investments, if we give a look at the inflow of foreign direct investments at global level, we see that starting 2016, we saw a strong decrease that almost shared by two the number of investments that we had around the world. This is the context where the Belt and Road Initiative started and it was firstly announced by Xi Jinping in 2013 and had the big event. Probably the historian will consider the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation held in 2017 as the year where the Asian century would be considered at the beginning. And we had this system of the Tiangsha, the typical, sorry for my Chinese, this new type of imperialism, but probably at European level, at Western country level, we have no words to really understand what Tiangsha is. But let's come to our ports and the maritime Europe. What is the common sentiment towards Belt and Road Initiative in Europe and in Italy at this moment? Well, at European level, we still consider that the European Union is the world's most attractive region for foreign direct investment. This is a statement that is in a Jacques Delors association paper issued by European Union a couple of years ago. Another common sentiment is China is trying to buy European ports. Another common sentiment, I would like to show you this picture produced by my friends at SRM. The Med is becoming a Chinese-like. You can see here the Europe map and MENA map inside the China borders. Another point is that China is the owner of Piraeus port and Italy is the next target. Well, let's start from this point to try to check the facts on that. Let's give a look on the left to the Chinese foreign direct investment in Europe. You can see that we had an incredibly rise of them up to 2016, but starting 2016, we had a strong decrease of foreign direct investment from Chinese companies in European Union. And if you give a look to the right, you will see that the China Belt and Road investment map of 2020, the COVID year, in which you can see that the full amount of foreign direct investments of China in Europe are inside Belt and Road Initiative, so that is not the total foreign direct investments of China, arrived to a level that is under the South American ones, giving the idea that Belt and Road Initiative became a worldwide project, is no more an Asian European project with something to share with Africa, but it's a worldwide project in which probably Europe is not at the center of the interest, or at least is no more at the center of Chinese interest. Just to do a counter check on that, give a look on the left on the foreign direct outflow of investment of China in 2020 compared to 2019. Well, they are more or less the same, so it's not a problem of the COVID era. Let's enter into the maritime facts. Well, 94% of EU-China trade by volume is operated via sea lines, against 1% of via rail, 3% via road, 2% of via air. And also when we talk about value of trade, 64% of EU-China trade is operated via sea line. The main way to manage sea lines is the container sector and the container transport. And Chinese investments are mainly focused on container terminals when we talk to investments in port. And in the last 10 years, they acquired around terminals operators with a majority or a minority shares in 14 European ports, which amount to around 10% of European logistics capacity in container sector. This is the map of where the Chinese presence is in European ports, and you can see that they are spread around the main European ports. Just to give you an hint on Piraeus, you can see the picture here. Piraeus was not by Chinese, is a long leasing, and in less than 7 years, in Piraeus passed to be a container port for less than 700,000 TEUs to more than 5 million TEUs, with 500 million of Chinese investments there. Just to give you an idea, Piraeus was 1/3 of Gioia Tauro, now is 2 times Gioia Tauro. And the number of people working there increased dramatically during these years. Let's enter into the main Chinese state-owned enterprises in European ports. COSCO Shipping, China Merchant Group, and China Communication Construction Company Limited. There are the 3 companies involved in operation. COSCO is one of the main container operator worldwide, is the 4th, as the first worldwide ship owner. China Merchant Group is an operator that is investing in ports. China Communication Construction Company is less interest in ports, but is the one who signed the 2 memorandum, the 2 agreement of the 28 of the Memorandum of Understanding that Italy signed in 2019. Let's enter a second on COSCO. I still have 2 minutes. I would like to arrive to a brief conclusion. I would ask 1 minute more. Well, COSCO is the 4th operator in the world, controlling around 12% of the global container capacity. In the sector of container, that is the backbone of the international trade, we had 3 main tendencies: vessel gigantism, concentration, and vertical integration. In vertical integration, we had shipping company buying terminals, ports. Here you can see the market share of, in Europe main trades, Europe, North America, Far East Europe, of the main shipping operator. Well, we see that COSCO has 15% of the share of the trade between Far East and Europe, and around 5% of the share between Europe and North America. Please consider that when we are talking about the container transport sector, we are talking about operator that wants to control also the terminal ports where they are working, because this is the way how people is working today in this sector. This is the market share in European terminal operation, which you can see that in North Europe, China Merchants has a share that is around 2% in 2016, while COSCO had a wider presence in South Europe port terminals, with the acquisition of 51% of Noatum in 2017, has created probably the biggest share of the private operator in European ports. I do not consider Hutchinson Whampoa, that is a Hong Kong-based company, is a private company that operates in a very separate way, at least up to now, to the state-owned company, Chinese companies. And so we can see that the presence of COSCO is definitely, and that the various Chinese state-owned enterprises seems to be driven by geopolitics. But if we make an economic analysis, we see that they are the same type of political attitude that all the other major shipping lines are having around Europe, to buy terminals in order to vertically integrate their supply chain. The answers, last 2 slides. Well, we have seen 2 weeks ago an answer from USA and G7 as a post-pandemic answer to Belt and Road Initiative, with a B3W, Build Back Better World, an affirmative initiative for meeting the tremendous infrastructure needs of low and middle income countries, 40 trillion up to 2035. But frankly speaking, we still probably, if we still haven't understood what Belt and Road Initiative fully is, we probably still don't know what Build Back Better World is. But for sure, my idea is that is a sort of follower reply to the Belt and Road Initiative. That is something strange from the US perspective that has always been a worldwide leader. To close my speech, what is the post-pandemic scenario for Europe and European ports? We are facing Belt and Road Initiative versus B3W, probably. In this situation, the border position of Italy could be used in order to gain the best from both projects. This is something very difficult, but I remember that when Italy was on the border between the Western country and the Soviet area, they were the years in which Italy did the best for its economy. Next generation EU, with the green challenge and digital challenge, is giving to our ports a great amount of money. Probably we do not need foreign direct investment in this respect, because we will have so much money that probably we don't know how to spend them. The problem of our country, for example, will be how to spend the money that we will have. The role of global carriers drives the idea that the COSCO policy is the one of all the other carriers. If you want to treat them differently from there, yes, it is an option. But frankly speaking, it doesn't sound in the idea of free market and free trade that we have always had in our history and in our policy. Learn lesson from lockdown and Suez blockage. Port and terminal could block the full European economy. We have to understand that having a presence in the ports means that you can define how the economy of a country is working. And this is something that we have taken in mind also for the policy of the shipping companies. Arctic route and the Euromed challenges are aspects in which we will see how the Chinese that declare themselves as an Arctic country, recently they declared themselves as an Arctic country in order to try to use also that way to arrive in Europe, is a point that we will have to discuss in the future. While we have to consider that, talking under an Italian point of view, we have to consider that the Euromed challenge that we have with the strong presence in this moment of Turkey and Russia in Libya is probably creating a setup for the Mediterranean Sea that could create to our ports probably much more problem than the presence of the Chinese. As Professor Geraci mentioned, well, in Europe, we have the usual idea to consider everything black or white. Chinese have the Tao, in which you have black and white, and we have white and black. Probably this is an approach that we should try to adopt in order to understand and better manage the position that Belt and Road Initiative is offering us, because in such a way we could try to gain from our specific and particular position. Thank you, and sorry for my 3 minutes more than it was given to me as a speaker.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is an exception. The other speakers, I will ring the bell after 12 minutes because we need to stay within the time. But thank you very much, very interesting. I have one quick follow-up, really bullet. Do you think that Italy is falling behind in this competition with other ports? And the second side of the question is, do we need Chinese money or can we do it by ourselves? So even if China invests elsewhere and not in Italy, we kind of don't care because we are capable of doing it.
Well,
very quick bullet.
The position of Piraeus as an hub port needs a position closer to the market, the European market. The Vado investment, I think that will give rise to a big flow of trade through China. Trieste and Venice has to create their position. Probably in this moment, we don't need Chinese money to invest in our ports. We have enough, but we will probably be one of the main direction for the trade of Chinese flow, much more than Northern European in the future.
But my question is, if there is no COSCO or other companies investment in the port, will the containers go there or they go where they buy, so they integrate themselves with shipping and logistics? Can we have Trieste being the hub without the Chinese money?
in order to
Not for
reach
the money, not for the money, but because Costco is both.
in order to reach the Central Europe market, the Italian ports are the best solution after an hub ports in Athens. So in this respect, I think that we will have a good position irrespectively of their direct investment.
Okay, thanks. I agree with that. That's why we really wanted to put all the Italian ports on the map to make sure that there was at least some interest. So thank you very much. I move now to the second speaker, Professor Marella, who will give us some very good insight on a very topical discussion. What's happening with the investment agreement with China? Did we do the right thing after so many years of negotiation? Where do we stand? Is it dead? Is it sleeping? Will it be resuscitated? And what do you think we should do? Floor is yours. I set the tone, 12 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Geraci. And let me thank the organizers, my dear colleagues, Professor Chiara Tuo, Stiano Di Pepe, Sergio Carbone, as well as the other speakers. Now, I'll try to stick within the time, and I have also a PowerPoint presentation.
Sorry, Professor, maybe if you can speak closer to the microphone, because we need to hear a little bit clear.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? That's the best I can do. It's 100. I have a PowerPoint presentation, a small one, which I will throw in a second. I hope not to waste time under the control of our president. Okay, now you should see it. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for the excellent presentations and for the thoughts. We have anticipated what I wanted to say, and actually I will cut short some of the things that I wanted to present, since Professor Ducci and yourself, Professor Geraci, have anticipated many of the key points that I would like to try to at least to address. And in fact, the purpose of my presentation is to offer some thoughts on the main issues and challenges of rebooting a possible investment agreement between the European Union and China. As you know, we had one, the famous SKY, which is the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on investment. And that is the result of 7 years of very intense negotiations with 35 rounds. And maybe surprising, it's considered to be a good agreement, at least inside the European Union among experts. You see that this agreement has basically stopped. It has been, let's say, closed on the 30th of December of 2020. And of course, different issues concerning human rights issues have paralyzed its moving forward. Now, in this agreement, there is, let's say, many interesting points, but the purpose of this agreement was and is to facilitate investment between the parties, to achieve legitimate policy objectives, and it has some focus, of course, it's an investment-only agreement, on foreign direct investment. Of course, already here, I see some critical issues, because this is an agreement which can be understood inside the branch of law, which is international investment law. But we also have to remember that international investment treaties have always been imagined and designed considering a private investor, not a public investor in another country. And that is a first critical point which has to be remembered. This agreement talks about many sectors, including maritime and air transport, although we'll not find the word port in any part of this agreement. So it is considered as involved in a general policy on that. It has also some, of course, for what concerns international maritime transport, this agreement talks about investment in land-based auxiliary activities like cargo handling, container, and maritime agencies, and it is articulated between some general rules and a specific schedule of commitment. Now, there is also an institutional setting, which is also interesting to remember. It doesn't talk about investment arbitration between private investors against a state, which is another classical feature of international investment law. Here, we are back to the past. It's a government-to-government business. And there's an investment committee, which is quite powerful, in charge of monitoring the implementation of the agreement. And for the other topics of the agreement, which has, suscitated a lot of enthusiasm by, let's say, those who are interested in non-trade issues, sustainable development, workers' rights, and so on. Well, that is a different chapter with a different system of diplomatic solution. There's also some rules concerning general exceptions, security, taxation, and some space for autonomous measures. As I said, it is rather general. It's not specific, and it has now been finalized, where the initial schedule was to follow this arrow. So legal scrubbing, translation, the signature, but then the famous European Parliament and Council phase, where it is presently stopped. I suspect also there's also a passage in national parliaments, but that's an EU law issue, which I leave to my colleagues who are experts in the field. But let's stick to there, and we are presently in this track. So is this an agreement which in a post-pandemic world may still work? And that is the second part of my presentations that consider some strategic issues. As you will see, I will present them as simple tool of analysis, and you may draw your conclusions. And by the way, the same tool of analysis should be used not only talking about China, but also considering about any other state investing with state-owned corporations in European countries on Italian ports. Now, the three critical indicators are the following. What commercial purposes is linked to a merger and acquisition, or is connected with port? What political purposes, what military purposes are behind it? Now, if you have a private direct investment, your answer stays at number one. If you are talking about a state-owned company, well, you need to run the analysis up to number three. And that is why, unfortunately, I partially disagree with my two previous speakers, where they say, well, let's separate trade from politics. We can separate them if we stick to number one, which is we have a private investor in a foreign country. But if the investor comes from a state, which is a state-owned company, then you need to think about the other two. And that's not a mystery, unfortunately. And that's probably the cause of a lot of confusion in the discussion that we have, that perhaps doesn't allow us to structure a better deal with China, if that's the road ahead, of course. The commercial purpose of a port, in fact, should be the only purpose. But when you have the commercial purpose of a port, the famous Convention and Statute of International Regime of Maritime Ports of 9th of December 1923 already says that, well, you have a gateway for trade and economic development. But that is, of course, the normal use of the port. It doesn't talk about valuable data on logistics on the local economy. And of course, it is something which has to be aligned with competition law rules, which is not, by the way, the fault of Chinese. It's a matter of regulation in Italy and the European Union. So if you want to have more competition in a port, then you have to do it and avoid possible, escaping practices like imposing restricted contractual terms, or gain a competitive advantage, unifying ports plus shipping companies. That is a competition law issue. Now, the second indicator, which is more worrisome, is the political use of a port. And unfortunately, we have seen some, and we can imagine easily other uses of the port. Well, that means to use port investment to gain political leverage and expand political influence. Now, think about embargo issues. Well, what happens if there's an embargo against China and the European Union has to take some measures on China? Think about the situation in Russia, for example, right now, and vice versa, by the way, because that with our counter sanctions, we are still stuck. The second problem could be weaken port state control. You know, the ports are also the entry point for customs clearance. And, you know, that link, that little link must be reinforced in order to have full compliance with the customs clearance in the EU single market. The third issue is international political average. But that is, has already been mentioned concerning the Piraeus Port Authority. Now, it is well known that lately, I mean, recently, China, or let's say COSCO, has, let's say, suggested the Greek government to take a specific stance, not in economic issues, but in a political issues, which is to block a European Union statement at the United Nations criticizing China's human rights record. Now, that is not a normal use of a port, of course. Third, and that is the third indicator, which has to be taken with attention, is the dual use of a port. Dual use means civil and military. Once you have the control, the commercial control of some terminal of a port, well, some issues need to be addressed. Professor Geraci was saying that we're not Djibouti, for example, but in Djibouti, now there's a home base of the Chinese Navy. So how far does it go? I mean, that is something which has to be addressed. There's also an issue on military intelligence gathering, of course, because if European ports are at stake, it's NATO military ships, which are going in and out. It may also be used for industrial espionage. Of course, I'm speculating at this point, but there are certain uses that you don't normally suspect when a private investor is investing, but you can certainly imagine if a state is behind it. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that there are some, in my view, regulatory disconnections, which is not the fault of China necessarily. I mean, it's just a matter of finding a better deal with an important partner. And so these disconnections are sometimes due to a disconnection inside the European Union. Well, think about the current legislation, the current FDI inward screenings regulations, which is Regulation 2019 number 452, which is a framework screening, which makes sense because we should have a European view on that. But we know that this regulation talks about cooperation, and we are trapped into the differences between what is the EU competence on that and what is the national competence on that. But that's an internal European problem, as you can see. And certainly we can do better on that. Then we have in Italy the famous Golden Power legislation. Now, is it designed for this situation? My answer would be rather no. It's designed for general issues concerning taking control of national strategic assets, but it's not targeted or designed, fine-tuned to address this issue. No surprise that before law number 8494, Italian ports were regulated in a specific way. But then, as we know, the European Court of Justice introduced full competition inside the port. So in conclusion, we need to talk expressly about ports in a future investment agreement with China, and we should realign the rules to the economic reality in order to address the issues, the critical issues so that I have highlighted. I mean, there's nothing that we should block us from finding a good agreement, which is, let's say, in line with the interest of the European Union and Italy, including specific rules on state-owned enterprises. Because if you look at the definition of investor, that is quite interesting. Definition of investor, you don't find state-owned enterprise. You find a vague rule which sounds like a private investor, which is not. But it's not the same to have a private Mr. Wang or to have a multi-million multinational company controlled by the state behind it. So if you want to have foreign direct investment regulation, you need to address the things and calling them with their name. You need to strengthen competition law rules, and you certainly do not have to privatize ports like Piraeus. We have mentioned Piraeus, but who's responsible for that? It's not China. I mean, Piraeus is our lack of vision in Europe of leaving the Greek government, trapped with debt. So, but taking lessons from history, we should certainly understand what is the best thing to recalibrate rules on investments, and in particular to insert in a future CAI EU treaty in order to address all issues. So all in all, Mr. President, I would conclude saying, let's have no ideologies, let's be reasonable. And that is probably the best thing to do in this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 13 minutes and a half, we're getting to our optimum length. Well done. Quick question. You mentioned, it's very interesting, the fear, if I may say, that when Chinese invest, then they influence politics, for example, in the UN Security Council. That's my understanding. Now, from your analysis, do you find a strong correlation, or is more an anecdotal fear that really does not materialize very often, or materialize randomly so that we cannot really link? Yes, we know that Greece did say something in favor of China, but we also know that China is very present in Germany, in Rotterdam. I don't see Holland being soft. In fact, Holland is the spearheading the EU effort in putting sanctions on China, on human rights. So they kind of don't seem to care that 10% of the biggest terminal in Rotterdam is in the hands of Chinese, 30% of the biggest for a total of 10. Do you see this is a kind of one of the fear, the myth of fear, but then it doesn't really happen? Or do you think it's a serious fear? And how do, and also, sorry, do we care? Like, do you think Italy would vote against the UN if the Vado investment goes from 40 to 60%? I don't know.
Well, I think that this is a lesson that has to be taken. It depends on regulation, and it depends on the level of your external public debt. I mean, we have 160% of debt. We're not certainly in position to decide many things. And I think Greek serves as an interesting example on how things may go, but certainly it's anecdotal, but I wouldn't use that word because it sounds like, you know, something strange happening once in history. I think it's perfectly normal that China pursue its own interest and its own political agenda. I mean,
no, I agree, but and that's why when I talked about the debt trap, I said Sri Lanka, maybe Greece is vulnerable, but as you know, we have 450 billion of our debt in foreign hands already. So now 450 billion, 1/3 of our debt is with the central bank. So about, you know, we have 1/3 of our debt in foreign hands. Do we really worry that China invests 2 billion out of the 700 billion of debt that we already have held by foreigners? Because you're right, but what's the scale of the, you know, we listen more to Frankfurt maybe than Beijing when it comes to who owns our debt.
I certainly agree, but certainly the moment, you know, Frankfurt is still part of the European Union, and when our foreign debt is in the hands of a competitor, I'm not talking only about China, but any other state. I mean, you have to consider the consequences of that, okay. And it's a matter of measure. I'm not saying it's not the black and white reasoning that you were doing before, but it's a matter of how far can you go? It's a matter of national security also on foreign debt, which I always believe that, and it's not only on China, of course, but China in this moment is in a particular position, needs international support, and you know, politically speaking, makes perfectly sense that it uses all the means that is on disposal. But the problem is on the other side. What is our position on that? What is the European Union position on that? Are we going to allow that a situation like the Greek situation repeats again? My answer should be no. I mean, we should take this lesson and try to align our interest to the Chinese interest, which is the essence of business.
Well, let me ask you, sorry, because I want to then follow on the next presentation by Professor Pepe that talks about this investment. Why are we worried about the Greek situation? What harm has it brought to Europe, in your view?
Harm to Europe. I mean, it has introduced a way of, first of all, in European Union decision-making, security issues are taken by unanimous vote. in the European Council. So if you have one country voting against, you have blocked any sanction that the European Union can impose on China. So I don't think this is a small detail. And so I'm worried about the presence in one member state and the influence in one member state. And that's what I see in Europe. So far, we have not seen it. We have seen it in the Security Council. But, you know, if things go bad, I mean, that's certainly the next move.
Okay, I understand. Now, really 30 seconds.
I'm not saying that this will happen.
No, I understand. I think it's correct observation. 30 seconds on this investment agreement, the so-called SAI. Is it really important, given that the boundary on country and EU competence on investment is kind of blurred, and it's not really, some people say the EU does not do investment. So this is just a kind of an MOU. It doesn't matter. Every country decides who should invest in their home. And this is just a political statement to tell the Chinese, we want to try to do things nicely, just like our Belt and Road MOU, but then it really is not enforceable in any way. What do you think from a almost legal point of view? Is it practical, is it a political thing, or is it really something that would determine countries' decision on who buys their asset?
No, I think as it stands, that this document is rather general and vague. It's not very specific. And therefore, and that's why, by the way, in the institutional final clause, there's a space for a joint committee to develop single specific rules and regulations. So I think it's a good result, you know, in terms of, you know, finding a common platform between the European Union and China. But certainly, this is not the instrument that you can use for conducting all position. And in particular, this is not the instrument that an Italian company can use against China in case, you know, things go bad in China. And that is what worries, more worrisome in my view. I mean, investment state dispute resolution mechanisms are not at all small things, are fundamental things. And if you take the famous debate that we have against ISDS today, many people, many colleagues of mine, do not understand that most of the ISDS are useful not to multinational corporations. They are useful to small and medium-sized companies, which is 95% of Italian companies. So if you take that away, because you think, oh, you can review the policy of the state, but take that away, then you are in the hands of the sovereign. Not only China, but of course, whatever state we are. But that's strange that in UNCITRAL, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, the trend today is to, you know, say ISDS are just, you know, ridiculous. Companies should never be able to attack a state because they think about Philip Morris against Uruguay. They should think about Marella versus, you know, Russia or another country.
Yeah, small SMEs. You're right. Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. And now that we talk about whether we should allow to have a Chinese company invest or not in our asset and who should make this decision, I give the floor to Professor Lorenzo Schiano Di Pepe, who will tell us a proposed EU regulation that is kind of a screening tool, maybe, to not only decide what the Chinese can buy, but who is behind the buyer. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the floor. Thank you to the organizers for putting together such an interesting and timely event, and thank you to the audience who are listening. I will now share my screen, and the screen shows that the topic of my presentation is the proposed European Union regulation on foreign subsidies distorting the internal market. I wouldn't like to be picked out as a mood breaker here around the table, but this is certainly an element that we have to consider and to discuss and to analyze at this present time when we engage in any assessment of the EU-China economic relationships, even with regard to such a specific aspect as ports. I will try in the minutes that are allowed for delivering the presentation to touch briefly on 3 points. I will provide an overview of the Commission proposal. I am not sure that everybody who is listening is aware of the details of this proposal. I will not have the time to go into the details, but I hope to be able to provide a basis for further analysis for those who are interested. Secondly, I will move to a brief discussion of the potential impact of this proposed regulation if and when it is adopted, and if and when it enters into force on investments in ports. And finally, I will conclude my presentation with some takeaway points. Here we have a picture of the front page of the Commission proposal. It dates back to May 2021, and it is a proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council, which means that it will be adopted according to the so-called ordinary legislative procedure. What can we say about this draft instrument? Or it is not a draft as a proposal, but it is a draft as far as the internal dialogues between the European Union institutions is concerned. The rationale behind this legislative proposal is to fill an existing gap in European Union law, the gap being represented by the fact that European Union legislation presently does not deal with state subsidies when the subsidy is coming from a third state. We are all aware of the fact that an important body of rules and case law exists within the European Union legal system as far as state aids are concerned. But of course, such rules are only concerned with the aids or subsidies which are provided by a member state. The Commission proposal contains specific rules with regard to aspects such as concentrations and public procurement, but it is really built on 3 main pillars, which are not surprising because they are quite typical of European Union legislation in this area. Such pillars being the definition of distortion, what a distortion of the internal market is, the tools that are available to the European Commission to combat, address, and eliminate such distortions, represented by review, investigation, and inspection. And finally, a possibility to impose fines and periodic penalty payments on entities which are breaching the prohibition of subsidies. It comes as no surprise that the proposal is highly controversial, and the fact that it's controversial, I think, will be apparent to anybody who has been listening to the 2 previous presentations. Indeed, the Commission proposal may be qualified as inconsistent with some recent moves at the European Union as well as at domestic level. When we use, as an example, the CAI that Professor Marella just described, on the one hand, and the memorandum of understanding between Italy and China that was mentioned by Professor Geraci earlier, on the other hand. However, this move appears to be backed by the support of a significant number of private and public entities. This is demonstrated by the outcome of the public consultations that preceded the publication of the proposal, where you can find the comments on an earlier white paper by the European Commission and the contributions of industry associations, but from Europe, but also by entities which are in principle, of course, against this possible development, such as the Chinese Chamber of Commerce in Europe. What about the potential impact of these future or possible future regulations on investments in ports? It's difficult to make a full assessment, so I will provide some elements, some ingredients, some elements that can be used for to feed our debate. First of all, there are several built-in references within the Commission proposal to maritime transport-related legislative instruments. So one has to assume that the Commission does not exclude the possibility to apply this regulation in the future to ports, port infrastructures, and investment in ports. Second element to be considered is that the fact that the Commission proposal has a very far-reaching substantive scope of application. This is made clear by the content of Article 2, Para 2, for example, which defines the scope of application of the regulation as addressing foreign subsidies granted to an undertaking engaging in an economic activity in the internal market, and an undertaking acquiring control or merging with an undertaking established in the EU is considered to be engaging in an economic activity in the internal market. If we consider the way in which the Commission and the European Court of Justice tend to interpret this kind of wording, we have to conclude that this wording may be quite all-encompassing. The threshold for investment to be considered presumably not distortive of the market is relatively slow if we think about the possible or the likely investments that exist in the field. Very interesting, and I think quite topical, is the fact that the Commission insisted that enforcement should be carried out only at EU and Commission level, not at national level. And this, I think, underlines the fear for competing national interests between member states to play a role in whether to put in question or not an investment coming from a foreign third country. I think I have a couple of minutes left, and these are more than enough to go to my takeaway points. And my takeaway points are primarily concerned with the external aspects or the external fallout of the Commission proposal. First of all, this is a work in progress. We are not talking about a piece of final legislation. This is subject to the contribution of the European Parliament and of the Council. So we have to wait and see, to watch this space, to monitor the progress in order to see what path will be finally taken as far as this proposal is concerned. I have some doubts about the effectiveness in a strictly legal meaning of this term. If we consider that inspections or investigations may may have to be carried out abroad in order for the Commission to find out whether there has been a distortion of the market or not, I doubt whether the Commission proposal will be able to achieve that purpose. But this is, of course, is a detail, if you wish so. A more general point that I would like to make is that I do not believe that the objective of the Commission is to raise obstacles to foreign investments as a matter of principle in general or with regard to China. This would be against everything that the European community and Union and Commission has always been fighting for. Free trade includes, in a broader sense, also free investment, and it would be unbelievable and unacceptable if this was the objective of the Commission, which I don't think it is. So what is the real aim that the Commission wants to achieve? There is a book around which has been recently published, and I had the privilege to attend the launch of its Italian version, Italian edition. The book is entitled The Brussels Effect and is authored by Professor Anu Bradford of Columbia University in New York. And the book is about how the European Union and the European Union legislation is shaping, directly or indirectly, the legislation of third countries. So I think we have to read into this proposal the attempt to shape some practices of third countries, including practices of China with regard to investment, or perhaps the attempt to shape future international negotiations with regard to a possible future international instrument within the framework of the WTO, covering subsidies from third states. This would be probably the best way to approach the problem, rather than by unilateral negotiation. But the European Union has often used unilateral legislation in order to push international partners to the negotiating table internationally. Thank you very much. I cannot hear you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. If I'm correct, tell me, you are not too worried that this is going to be adopted soon, neither it will really have an impact on inbound FDI. It's a long process, many things to be ironed out. You know, sellers in Italy should not be worried that their asset sale could be blocked.
I have no, of course, inside information about the timing. I would like to have, but I don't. I think the point here is fair competition, not only within the European Union, but also from as far as foreign competitors are concerned. So I think the main concern here should be to ensure our businesses, including small, medium, and large businesses, that they are not going to lose out because some foreign competitor, be it Chinese or from elsewhere, is subsidized from its home country. I think that's the point. So I do not see a direct, I do not have the fear that you described, and I think that we should focus on what I've just mentioned.
And I tell you one thing I've seen when we discuss with China on trade issue, mostly not much investment. The Chinese view, whether it's true or not, but the argument is we are not really subsidizing. We are just the largest economy in the world. So we are the country with the biggest scale. It's you guys who are inefficient because you have small markets. So even when we go to WTO discussion on subsidies and dumping, they say, we're not dumping anything. We are not below cost. We are not below international prices because we, China, we are the international market, not you guys. And that gets into a very interesting debate on the definition of international price. They say we are the Chinese domestic prices is international prices because we are the most efficient thing. And I know that they would do that. It's not inside information. I suspect that they would do the same when it comes to investment. They say we just have scale. How do we subsidize things? We just have low average costs.
Okay, the easy answer to your question is that the definition of state aid, state subsidy is a very tricky field, because of course what is a subsidy from one perspective can be other than a subsidy from a different perspective. However, this is exactly the reason for which the best way out of the problem would be to try to find out, to work out an agreed solution, an agreed definition, an agreed instrument covering this, the possibility of fighting against subsidies. And I am not excluding the possibility that this unilateral move is in fact a way to try to convince international partners of Europe to think about the possibility of refreshing WTO negotiations around this subject.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to last but not least, President Pino Mussolini. Good morning and welcome.
My surname is Mussolino, though. Sorry.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry. Okay. So please, the floor is yours. 12 minutes.
Sure.
Tell us your insight into from again slightly go back to the commercial side as a port representative, please.
Well, okay. Let me share my screen first, and then I'll go back to. Okay, hold on. There we go. Wait a sec. Hold on a sec. I just want to give you the full screen. Okay, there we go. Couple of informations just for those who are viewing and who doesn't know who I am. Well, before chairing the ports of Rome, I have been for 4 years the president of the Port Authority of Venice. So I participated directly in the drafting and the discussion about the BRI back since 2017. I participated to the mission of President Mattarella and Mr. De Rio in 2017. So I think I have a privileged standpoint since the beginning of the discussions about BRI and the Italian port system. After 4 years in Venice, I have been promoted as a chairman of the ports of Rome. And so I have now, I would say, a decent understanding of what happened in the last 4 to 5 years in regard to the Belt and Road. In fact, I wanted to be nice, so I have used a quote from none less than William Shakespeare. What are we talking about? Belt, road, or much ado about nothing? And I would say that the latter, at least at the moment, is the case. I am unbiased, okay? I'm a trade guy, I'm a merchant guy, I stick to the markets, and I try, as long as I work for Italy, to maximize the interests of my country and my economical system within the framework of free market rules. So I don't have any preconceived and biased position towards any nation or anybody, but I am evaluating and assessing the situation that I have seen in front of me. And so let's start with, this was the Belt and Road has launched the first slide in 2013 when it was still called One Belt and One Road. Let's not forget that the name has been changed in BRI because it was seen as a too much imperialistic in the definition of one belt and one road. So it's still that in China, it's still Idai Ilo, and that tells how much marketing is spent internally and externally. And they changed the name so that it's kind of more palatable for non-Chinese, but they kept it in the exactly same way for the Chinese market. And the description is quite interesting. And please bear in mind with this description, because I got back to that with my last slide. Essentially, what they we're launching, aside of the beautiful speech that was made in 2013, 6th of September in Astana, about building a common future a shared future for mankind and so on and so forth. But in essence, it's a transcontinental long-term policy and investment program which aims at infrastructure development and acceleration of the economic integration of countries along the route of the historic Silk Road. More or less 140 countries joined, some of which mostly are in sub-Saharan Africa, 40 namely, 34 in Europe and Central Asia, and namely 18 belonging to the EU. Moving forward to the next, this is what has happened back in 2018, 2019, so some 5 years into the launch of the BRI. The commitment of funding was 4.2 trillions and BRI projects by China, trillions of US dollars, of course. And its main way of funding, it's through bank loans granted by government, SOEs, development agencies, and private institutions. I honestly and respectfully beg to differ when somebody said, let's split economy and geopolitics, because here it's geopolitics played through economy. The British were calling this back in the 19th century, the Great Game. And this we can summarize it in the Great Game 2.0 or 4.0 as you wish. Because according to the data firm Refinitiv, as of September 2020, the amount of BRI projects owned by Chinese SOEs or government entities is an appalling 59%. So we're not talking about market forces, we're talking about essentially a projection of a government through which is built this initiative. And only 26% is belonging to the private sector. I will skip the next one, but just keep an eye on the four images and just have a quick look. Essentially, BRI is a complex operation that is merging economical, military, political aspects through which China is simply, and rightfully so, trying to expand its global clout. Well, okay, let's go on more technical and economical businesses. This is the trade balance between China and the major EU countries, Germany included, all of which the net exports are all negative. So BRI essentially is something that is helping flowing goods from China to Europe and not vice versa. First point. Second point, this is our network, the TEN-T network, the connectivity network of Europe, which has started already two editions ago. On the last revision, 2013, now we are revising the latest edition, and some changes will be made, but essentially it's the way that the Union has connected the North with the South and the East with the West of the Union, and it's the neural system of Europe. And this is where we are staying in terms of connectivity of European ports and dry ports and the connectivity system. Okay, let's go on. What are the investments along the BRI in EU ports? And as you can see, there are also a couple of minor investments in Italy, essentially of roughly $5 billion of US dollars that the Chinese have invested in European ports. 4.3, actually almost 4.7, have been invested in the Piraeus alone, while in Italy, only the shareholding participation in the Vado Ligure project are namely accounting for a meager 68 million of US dollars. The rest of the participations, please look at the percentages. They are all minority percentages in the major countries. Antwerp, Zeebrugge, and Rotterdam, none of them have, aside of the small container terminals in Zeebrugge, which is a ro-ro port. Therefore, it's not the main instance. They are all minority shareholding participations. None of them have built anything significant. At the next slide, which I carefully drafted last night, acquiring data from the ESPO forms of each and single port authority, are speaking much better than any possible reasoning or position paper or anything. Let's look at the trend of containers handled by the main Italian ports in the years 2018, 2019, 2020. It's an appalling flat line. It's an appalling flat line for each and any of them, excluding Savona. Why? Because Savona has literally doubled its capacity of berth with the opening of the Vado Ligure and all the new berthing capacity. So that's the only way where they grew. But let's talk about containers, which is the most important field where we're talking about BRI. Italy, throughput of containers is stable between 10 millions of TEUs and 10.7 millions of TEUs since 2010. We don't move an inch from there, and the participation in the MOU and the BRI hasn't changed a dime into that. There's not a single container more that has been brought into the frame by that operation. These are the real data. Everybody can take them out if you have the time and the will to check the ESPO forms. Moreover, more or less 450 millions of tons are coming out from Suez Canal every year and passing through the Mediterranean. Of those 450 million tons, Italy is able to intercept roughly 10% of it, 45 millions. And of those 45 millions, it's quite difficult to understand how much is coming out from China. So let's move forward. Well, this is a small exercise that I made about the North Adriatic Basin to show you what are the major markets and cargo destinations once they are entering into the North Adriatic ports. As you can see, Trieste has a largest share of Germans cargo, and that's why HHLA, so the Port of Hamburg, has invested in the logistic platform, literally acquiring 51% of shares of those 39 hectares in the port of Trieste. Not a Chinese entity. No investment have been made according to the MOU, and none will be made in a significant force. What is kind of curious is then 8th of June, a few days ago, HHLA has received an offer from COSCO Shipping Ports Limited that wants to acquire 30 to 40% of the shares of HHLA, which again, I repeat, has acquired land or concession in Trieste. So they try to enter from the back door. But what is it Germany doing is exercising and evaluating the golden power. So it is probably not happening again. What happened in Genoa then? Genoa was supposed to launch the BRI participation with the building of the dam. But unfortunately for the Chinese counterparts, we have EU public procurement rules. And once they were participating into that, they scored the 7th project. And so they were called off from the public procurement selection and they could not participate. I go quickly. Okay. It's a BRI, it's an opportunity for Italian ports if it allows the EU and Italy in stimulating the quality of production and improving the productivity of the manufacturing in EU, increasing and optimizing the logistics, and in promoting harmonization, basically mostly on digitalization and shared knowledge of technologies, and in supporting and obtaining bilateral or multilateral commercial agreements. And more than anything, it's an opportunity if we, as Europeans and European ports and companies, we can gain reciprocity of conditions in order to invest and export in China. Otherwise, it's not really a win-win solution. On the other hand, it's remaining only a hype, a beautiful one, but a one that is not producing significant economical results. If the investments that Chinese companies and SOEs are only based on the intention of penetrating certain markets without market-based criteria and financial feasibility of the projects. I just mentioned the Montenegro issue and the debt trap that is happening on the doors of Europe. Montenegro is now facing a bankruptcy situation for a useless highway that was considered negative, not by one, but by two feasibility projects. And of course, if the investments are not respecting the public procurement rules of the EU, and if the Belt and Road is aiming at dividing EU and its policy making, particularly in regard to the TEN-T network, for example, with the 17+1 initiative. Moreover, nobody speaks about that, but the ports and connectivity of the future needs to be built in a sustainable, greener way, and there's little of non-talks about that, also about the Italian results. What has happened in the last 2 weeks, that was the launch of the B3W, which is essentially the US answer to a BRI. I'm not really thinking that it should be confrontational, but from the onset, it seems slightly confrontational. What is significant here is that there are 4 key areas of intervention: climate, health and health security, digital technologies, gender equity and equality, and that most of it will be financed by private sector capitals with the catalytic investments from our respective financial institutions. So we are talking about something that is dramatically different from what the Chinese have presented. In a nutshell, what I can say right now is that there is nothing that has happened since 2019 and the signature of the MOU in the Italian ports, not in terms of investments, even less in terms of trades. We need to aim at expanding trades because that's our job in protecting our national economy and national interest. With that, we can have a dialogue and negotiate with everybody, but if we are not aiming at increasing our import and export in our ports and our trade throughputs in our ports, everything else is just fairy tale stories and it's just useless and a waste of time. So I would like to go back to real data. What I have shown to you are real, effective, verifiable data. It would be very nice if we could talk about that, totally unbiased, totally free of mind, thinking about the development of the Italian port system, the Italian logistics system, inserted within the EU framework, trading in a commercial manner with the rest of the planet, no matter what. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President. We are close to the end, so I take this opportunity, if I may, to ask you 1 or 2 questions and maybe to clarify some issues. President Mussolini, we don't see you anymore. I guess you're still there, but
I'm here. It's just that I don't want to use
the bandwidth. First of all, if I may, I want to thank you for saying that nothing has happened since 2019. I take it as a result of me leaving the government and being replaced by someone else who did not do the job that we left. But apart from the joke, I want to say, we need to be really aware that all the things that we heard that we want to improve trade, investments on are absolutely right. Guys, trust me, you don't see these things change in 24 months. Anyone who knows how China works is aware that these things take time. And in this highly tense geopolitical situation, again, you can go and read the yesterday comment after the meeting with Blinken. You cannot expect China to do business with us. If we continuously throw bad words at those who should buy our products that we want to sell to China and the rest of the BRI countries, of course, they said, well, guys, don't worry, we're going to buy things from someone else. We are not in Italy the unique producer of things, with some exceptions. So we need to be very, very careful that you are right too when you say the geopolitics cannot be separated from economies. And that's why I worry. When I say we need to separate, is because we will pay an economic price for our geopolitical choices that we entangle together, and China does it even more. That's why we don't see the benefits. We don't see the benefits because the Chinese don't understand if we want or not to do business with them. That's why we may have a trade deficit, which, by the way, per se is not a big thing. So we've always said, even before the Belt and Road, so that's not a result of the Belt and Road. The trade deficit is the reason why we do the MOU, not the output. But what do you think we should then do to improve our situation? Because we have a problem, Pino, how do we do a European strategy if you, Trieste, Venice compete with Rotterdam? How do we have a common EU strategy if the Western, so the Asian partner, they want to know, where do we go? We go to Mediterranean terrain or to the North Sea? Because I did go to Rotterdam to negotiate a common strategy. Our friends in Rotterdam said, well, we don't care because one container more in the Mediterranean is one container less in the northern ports of Europe. What do you propose? How do we can turn these nice ideas into practicality? They are accepted by our German and Dutch friends.
Well, I start from the bottom. Okay, by starting to have, for example, a common Mediterranean position towards the 10T revision, negotiating with Spain, France, Greece, Croatia, and then we build our own position and we go to negotiate with the Northern Range ports with a strong position, not like beggars, like we did in the last 10 years, with a strong idea that the door in the Mediterranean is as strong and as important for the Union as the door in the Northern Range. But if we don't do that, nobody is doing that on our behalf. It's not that the guys from Antwerp, which I know very well since I lived there for 5 years, or the guys from Rotterdam are coming to us and say, hey, Italian pal, here is a present, buy that. No, it's going to happen if we have a clear understanding of the role and importance of the Mediterranean, not just for the Mediterranean countries, but for the whole Union. And this policy making is all in our hands, not in Chinese, not in Germans, not in Belgians, not in the Dutch hands. It's in the hands of the Mediterranean countries. By doing so, we are also expanding our clout towards the northern side of Mediterranean, where we used to call it Mare Nostrum, and I can say that because now I chair the ports of Rome, so I feel I'm entitled for doing so. And we lost that. It's not necessarily an imperialistic thing. It's a trade thing. It's an open trade thing on a common level playing field. And secondly, as I said, I don't have any problem with China or dealing with China, but what we are aiming at is trades. We don't need Chinese money on infrastructure. You were asking that if we need that. We don't. We can build infrastructures, and we are good in building infrastructure. We can have the funding for building infrastructure if we have a strategy. With this strategy, we make actually, if we have a vision, through the vision, we make a strategy. Through the strategy, we make an implementation of it. We need to move from nice words to a strategic planning that brings back Mediterranean at the center of the framework, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do for this region of the planet. And in doing so, we're making also Europe stronger and the trade balance with China better and fairer.
One more thing to follow up, and then I want to close. You have been in Venice and now you're in Rome, and you know better than I, remember when we're discussing with Trieste, Venice, let's be honest, Trieste and Venice cannot even agree on a common Adriatic strategy. So the challenge of doing a European Mediterranean strategy, do you think are Greek, Spanish, Marseille and French and even the Northern African country would be happy to have this very good idea that I like to have a common Southern European, or do we in Italy fight with our own things with each other? We cannot even raise an Italian strategy, let alone a Mediterranean.
Well, that's a good point, and you're right in doing so. But the point is, it's again our flaw. I don't have any issue. When I was in Venice, I decided to go another way. I signed an MOU directly with the CEO of the Port of Piraeus in trades, and in doing so, we doubled the amount of containers that were coming to and from Piraeus and Venice, literally overnight. Nothing involving infrastructuring, just a nice bread and butter commercial deal between two ports. 50,000 TEUs more per annum overnight. So it depends by how you make things. And of course, if you ask me, do you share a single system of ports and do you maximize its interest? Absolutely. But if I would have the possibility with the central government that is telling me in terms of strategy how to maximize national interest, I respond, here I am, I obey to what are your strategies. In the absence of strategies, I just attend to the interest of my port and the institutions. So, what was sorely missed and what is still sorely missed is a national strategy which is coordinating and balancing the interest of the single ports with the national interest as a whole. And in doing so, there is the need of ideas, and those ideas need then to become legislative actions, plans, investments, long-term investments. We need to understand what we want. Another last point, we need to understand that not every port can do everything, and that we need to assess the need of birds and the need of infrastructure with the market and the interland markets that they are serving. If you're a fantastic, amazing breakbulk port, you don't need also a container berth if you have a port 200 kilometers away with amazing container berths, and so on and so forth. But of course, that cannot be said by the single president. That needs to be said by the national government, and through that, in a European framework of planning and developing.
Thank you. Now that's a good idea. And since you're in Rome, next time I'll invite you for coffee and we can discuss this at length, because I like the idea to do a plan. And by the way, to all the speakers, if in any way I can help to push this, let's do this for the interest of our country. So
it will be my pleasure.
I give back the floor to Professor Chiara because I have finished my duty. Sorry for going over 15 minutes, but there were so many interesting things, and I thought, and I see the audience is still there, so that's a good signal. Thank you. Floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Geraci. You are right. The discussion has gone on very smoothly and very well. So thank you very much to all of you. Now I think, following our agenda, that we would have 5 minutes, because then we have the conclusion by Professor Carbone of Q&A. We have the chat devoted to questions, and maybe our friend Sara Lattanzi, who ran. Okay, thank you, Sara. Maybe we can read the questions that have been addressed to the various speakers and try to address each of them.
Yes, surely. So there are 2 questions that I think already received an answer during our conference. So the first one was addressed to Mr. Picciocchi, and it was about the possibility to participate to public tenders by Chinese companies. So I think President Musolino, when he described in his last presentation, the public tendering procedure in Rome, answered the question. But if someone wants to give more insight on this aspect, it can do it. Of course, I think this is a legal aspect. So we also address these issues through the presentation of Professor Marrella and Professor Schiano di Pepe. Then there was a question on the chat addressed to President Musolino, that is in connection with another question about here the question was, if China is considered to be motivated by strategic issues, how can one explain Costco's sale the shares of Conateco terminal in Naples? And another question that is related to this first question was, President Musolino, you mentioned about the attempt of cutting a backdoor deal in Port of Trieste. What is your view on Costco HHLA deal on terminal in Port of Hamburg? So these 2 questions are addressed to President Musolino. If he wants to answer this question, maybe we can start from here.
Thank you.
I would, if you give me back the microphone. Okay. What about Conateco? Conateco was a total loss of investments, and Chinese are moved by strategic interest, but they're not a bunch of fools. So when they were losing money and losing money big, they just went out from that. It's not through the participation in and shares of a container terminal that they will control the 6 fleet movements, believe me. And therefore, that was just based on interest and based on functionality. What I'm rather sure, because I know them and I know that they have hell of port managers, is they don't want headaches, and they had more headaches than they wanted in Conateco, and that's why they call themselves out. First question. Second question, HHLA. I find it very interesting that when Italy sort of like said, we're about to exercise the golden power, if you are trying to buy anything in Trieste, the Germans came up, and then the Chinese went to the Germans to say, well, we're going to buy now something in the major company that is the holding of the operation. Again, everybody stays in the market and works towards its own personal selfish interest, as it should be. I think that we need to keep our guard high and our eyes open in terms of our strategic interests. That's what we are aimed to or supposed to do as Italians and as Italian sports managers. As I said, it's not about who is doing that. It's about what kind of outcome is coming to my national interests and to the interests of the Italian port system.
All right, thank you very much.
Something on the Conateco case, because, well, COSCO being my member as an association, the position in Conateco was given by, for sure, the loss of money, but also by the fact that entering into Athens and so changing strategy in Mediterranean by COSCO from going to direct ports, from adopting an hub and spoke system. They had Athens, and Naples was definitely so close to Naples, to Athens, and so they must go as delivery ports northern as possible. So with Athens, makes sense Vado, it makes sense Trieste, it makes sense Venice. Doesn't make sense Naples. And on top of that, also to manage a port terminal together with MSC is not so easy. Gioia Tauro learned something. And so they decided to avoid an headache and also to exclude the port that was not in their main strategic idea of outserving Mediterranean Sea.
So, Professor.
Okay, yes, because I had to activate again the microphone. There is Pietro Picciocchi, who maybe wanted to answer the question regarding the participation of Chinese companies in public procurement procedures. He had to leave our meeting, but maybe he is trying to join us again. I'm in contact with him. I don't know if in the meantime there is some other question that is there to be addressed. I don't know here in the chat, but maybe no. I don't know, Sarah, if you see something else.
Yes, there is again a geopolitical question raised here by an anonymous viewer. One Belt, One Road is economic project. So is it important to consider, I cannot read it anymore. Is it so important to consider EU about human rights point of view? So this is the problem we tackled about the differentiation between trade and geopolitical aspects. I don't know who wants to answer this question. I don't know, Professor Chiara Tuo, if you have a question for the panelists.
Well, I think that, yes, Professor Geraci.
Just one thing on the human rights issue, which is very dear to me, and just as a potential follow-up, I don't know how many of you know, I was actually in Xinjiang province just a few weeks ago to do a little bit of fact-checking on this labor force, forced labor, cotton, and so on. And I tell you my view. Of course, economy needs to be related to respect of human rights, which is one of our core values, and this is very, very important. We do, however, need to be careful, and I say this also as a former member of European government. Human rights problems are not just China. In Italy, we have human rights problems. We have dead people who cannot be buried because we don't have spaces. We have a trial the last 10, 20 years, and we ruin people's career. We have a high level of crimes who go unpunished. We don't know what happened to the Ustica plane 41 years ago. We don't have the right to safety. We have a problem on public roads that do not allow people to live in full safety as they should be in a developed country. So the issue of human rights is important, but let's not get carried into always accusing other people, because it's so easy to talk about human rights in a faraway place where most people have not been, because it doesn't affect our own daily life. It's nice to talk about it, to put like a pointer, a flag. Would we like Macron to put sanctions on Italy because we have a juridical system that is in crisis? And I'm referring to the issue of Palamara and so on. No, but so it is very difficult to be objective and very easy to fall into the trap. The human rights is just other people's problem. It's an important issue that every country needs to address, and every country has a problem to solve.
Thank you very much, Professor Geraci, and I see the hands raised by Professor Schiano Di Pepe and President Pino Mussolini. So maybe before Lorenzo, yes, because.
Thank you very much. It will be very brief. It is, Professor Geraci said it's very easy to use the human rights argument. It is also very easy or too easy to say we cannot talk about the problem of human rights because there is a human rights problem in Italy. I think I consider myself to be a friend of China. I'm a frequent visitor there. I think the sovereignty questions must be handled very carefully. So one should be very careful when statements are made. But I do not think that you can reasonably say that the situation in Italy and China, or in China and the European Union can be compared. So you can rule out the human rights problem in China by saying there is a human rights problem in our country. This is my stand.
No, sorry, let me clarify, because you are right. I'm not saying they are comparable. I'm saying that they are sometimes used as an easy escape. They are very different levels. But let me make a very clear statement. The genocide in Xinjiang is a fake news. I want to make it clear. I was there. There is no genocide. There is a problem of human rights. Maybe there's a problem that China has gone very, very heavy on anti-terrorism. I don't know if you go on the ISIS website, they go to your home, your sister, your mother, your friends, and everyone gets arrested. And maybe it's too much, but there is no target to an ethnic group. People don't get killed because they belong to a Muslim Uyghur minority. They get into trouble for other reasons. So this issue of human rights is important, but in fact, it's Holland, by the way they have a port in Rotterdam, that has accused China of this genocide. Genocide is a big word, and I think that even if the problems are very much different from our human rights problem, America has their own human rights problem. We should consider maybe putting sanctions on the US for their own reason, on Canada maybe.
We are doing the
France,
same.
or
You are
on
now
Belgium.
doing the same with America. It's
Belgium, now we have a football match. We get into this chaotic Italian drama about football. The things are uncomparable, but there are things that we should be, like you say, careful to accuse. If someone steals a piece of bread, we should accuse them of stealing a piece of bread, not of stealing 2 pieces of bread, because this is a bit unusual for us that claim to be a rule of law country, and then we don't use the rule of law. We have people waking up in the morning and turning potential faults into tribunal sentences. So we confuse input with output.
Thank you very much. Then we have President Musolino that wants to.
Well, Professor Tua and Professor Schiano Di Pepe, I'm a port manager, but I don't forget that I'm a lawyer by trade. And I am hopefully a lawyer who studied constitutional law and comparative constitutional law. I would honestly be extremely careful in making nonsense comparison between what can happen through flows of the system in the European liberal democracies and what is happening or happens in the Chinese political system. I do belong to a country where there is freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of political associations. And when I go to vote, I vote for as many parties as I want. As long as China doesn't belong and fit into this system, it may not make genocides. It doesn't change the fact that it's not the same system. I was raised, educated, and thank God I'm raising and educating my children. So let's not forget this, and let's not, for the sake of commercial interest, forget what we are and where we are coming from, because otherwise everything can be condoned, and I won't accept it. I'm sorry.
But you don't have to accept it. All I'm saying is that China is making mistakes, but not those we're accusing China of. And as a lawyer, you should know that if they have problem with human rights, we should address the human rights issue, not something else like the genocide. So
you sound like those German journalists in 1938. 1938, and then we discovered 1945 what has happened with making the sophists. Let's be careful, please. Let's be careful. Let's talk about China and trades. Let's not enter into these things because it's really, really a slippery slope. Please, please.
That's exactly what we would will do in the last part of this meeting. Just to answer the question that was raised with reference to the intervention of Avvocato Picciocchi, he asked me to inform the person that raised the question that the intention is to open these bids also to Chinese companies, as it was done for the Ponte Morandi in the recent years, and therefore that these bids will be absolutely international and therefore open also to Chinese companies. Then I think that we are running out of time on the basis of our agenda, and that we have here Professor Carbone, who will draw the conclusion of our conference for us. Thank you very much, Professor Carbone, for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chiara, and thanks also to all speakers of today. Was given a real complete picture of the problems existing in the field. I have to say that very much has to do And just to start from some of the last remarks or consideration, one point which is very important for us is how shall we treat the problem of the large ships and the impact they have on the Mediterranean in respect of the Atlantic side. Are we in a condition to have a common policy on these topics? And we may introduce as a common standard of our relationship with China or not? This is the problem of the lack of a common policy in Europe, a common policy which doesn't exist in shipping until now. And that is very difficult in the sense to overcome in a European vision consistent way the various problems which has been raised today. Let's say, for instance, some of the points which has been raised. Regulation and how does it fit the European regulation in respect of the common policy in respect of the trade with China. I think that we are facing a problem of overruling in terms of European regulation, which are involved in all these items, which, by the way, are in some way not consistent each other, and which may conflict with national single laws. This is a problem we have to face, and very frankly, I am quite concerned also with the last regulation which has been mentioned by Lorenzo Schiano, because it creates much more problems than solution. I repeat, the overruling and the not precise consistency of all these rules does not create the best atmosphere for a certainty and for achieving clear objectives and policy. I think that's in this sense very much has to do in order to provide at the same time also the best way of implementation of the single solution we try to propose, and in order to have a better exchange of commercial means between China and Europe. Of course, another item which I think is very important is the treatment of the investment. And in this respect, the treatment to be granted to Chinese, but are they to be considered as a public companies, or are they to be treated as private enterprise? And in this context, how does it work? The problem of the aids, state aids, which is a great item of this and field of discussions within Europe, and in particular in our country. But that is the subject which has been chosen for this seminar is a very important one. I hope all the best to this PRIN under direction of my important colleagues, Chiara Tuo, and I thanks on our behalf to all of you for the very interesting intervention you have made, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet you again. Thank you very much all.
So thank you very much, Professor Carbone. We have reached the end of our conference, or our meeting, and I wish to briefly thank again the speakers and Professor Geraci for having chaired our meeting, and also my colleague from the Department of Economics that have helped me in organizing this event. And lastly, but fundamental for my organization, Sara Lattanzi, that you have met some minutes ago, who is a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Genoa. Very, very much thank you to all for these, for your work and your help. So goodbye to everyone, and hope to have soon a new occasion to meet again and discuss about these very, very interesting topics. Goodbye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you again.
Bye.
So much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Professor.
Goodbye.